Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Evening grace to everyone listening late on highly concentrated Hugh. Here's what I have to tell you. The Supreme Court handed Donald Trump another victory, which I'll cover after this, but I'm joined by Admiral Mark Montgomery, United States Navy retired, from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Admiral, I listened to your breakdown this morning with John and Shanzer, and I would love for you to repeat it, your damage assessment from publicly available sources as to the efficacy of the American strikes on the Iranian nuclear weapons acquisition program.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. That was a good discussion I had with John Shanzer. Look, the first thing I'd say is that the word obliterate is not a technical battle damage assessment term. So we'll set that aside and just say, but the president is correct. There was significant damage done, and that's how Secretary Hegseth and then General Kane discussed it. The way you look at this is you have to look at all the INTs, all the intelligence collection methodologies. The first one we like to look at SIGINT, signals intelligence. We're great at this. The Israelis are great at it. And I am confident there were Iranians screaming into their phones right after this attack. We should get a lot of, and you're never more honest than when you just got slammed. So my gut reaction is we probably got some good intelligence that way. The second one's imagery intelligence. We're world class at this. You can see it. We're so good at it that now our commercial products are, and you're showing Maxar right now, can put this out and people like you and I can just look at it. On that imagery intelligence, I'll tell you right now, you can see the 6 pinpoint entry sites for 2 each of a massive ordnance penetrator. So 12 massive ordnance penetrators dropped from a B2, as you show there in the graphic, onto Fordo plant. They look clean. They look different because of the aspect of the angle, the overhead imagery. Doesn't matter. Those were clean entries. You can also see in that some geological perturbations between the before and after. So I think something happened. That gets at the third one, measures and signaling intelligence, MASCENT. This is where we're kind of world-class and standalone. We're listening for geographic tremors, seismic changes. Did we hear 150 foot thick vault of concrete drop a layer into the one below it? We know what that sounds like. We've got an idea what it feels like. Anyway, that kind of stuff. And then finally, human. This is where the Israelis are world class. Are they getting human intelligence from their various interlocutors? So you bring that all together and you get a battle damage assessment. I think we will determine that the Fordo plant is no longer functional as it was intended. Everything that had been left in there is destroyed. What you don't know is what was still in there and what was out of there. I think all the centrifuges were probably still in there. I imagine the highly enriched uranium was out of there.
So, Admiral, let me talk to you a little bit about, I heard you say that we drop the MOPs one after the other. So just walk me through, for a kid who could barely get out of high school physics, how do we do that without the first one blowing the second one up before it gets there?
So I'll take it even lower. I'll put it for a Pittsburgh Steeler fan. As you bring them up, as the B2 comes over at a pretty good altitude, it releases its massive ordnance penetrators. The first massive ordnance penetrator, we say it's a 30,000-pound weapon. The vast majority of that is a special hardened steel case that almost acts like a drill going in. And it goes in a very specific entry angle that's determined by the scientists and achieved by the pilots and how they drop it. And based on the altitude, the wind, everything, the release point, and it burrows down. That's how it gets down X number, reportedly, hundreds of feet, someone under 200 feet. And then inside it, it has yet another 5,000 pounds of explosive that go off, and especially with a special fusing at a time place that blows open basically a channel through which a second massive ordnance penetrator can produce and achieve the same effect. And you can get even deeper. And so you see these 3 on one of them in the southern aspect of the Fordo plant. You see these 3 very precise entry points that I think are 3 pairs of 2 MOPs. But we'll see. I could be wrong, but I think we'll hear good results from that. And I have to say something. This was a very good planning thing. I want to describe it differently than Secretary of Defense. This was a comprehensive plan. But the way the U.S. military works is we take a really comprehensive thing like you're briefed on, and we break it down into these little edible pieces, like takeoff, refuel over the Atlantic, refuel over Europe, get over the target site, escort, and then release. The only really hard, the thing that's unique on this one is the release of the massive ordnance penetrator. And while this was the first time in combat, these individual pilots have done this drill, scores, if not 100 times in their careers. They come back to the B-2. So they knew what they were doing. You put this together, that's what's beautiful about the U.S. military, is our ability to take all these things that appear to be routine and integrate 100 routine steps into one extraordinary event. To me, as an operational planner, as a military planner, that is the epitome of success. And real congratulations to the U.S. Central Command and CENTAF, the AFCENT team, Air Force's Central Command team, for executing this.
Now, Admiral, as an armchair consumer of a lot of popular history, I think this is a decisive moment in world history. If in fact it was successful in destroying the ability for Iran to produce more enriched uranium or to further enrich their 60% enrichment to 90%. Do you agree with me? That's a history trajectory changing decision by President Trump?
Two aspects of, I think, are history changing. One, someone took action to physically prevent another country from entering the nuclear club, right? That didn't happen with North Korea 20 years ago. It didn't happen with India and Pakistan. We chose to stop this from happening. Now, we were strongly encouraged by Israeli partners, but in the end, we chose to prevent this from happening. That has not happened. In the past, everyone has threatened and pounded the table and then backed off. One thing I'll say about President Trump is that he has held this opinion for 10 years, more than that even, that Israel should not have a bomb. And he stuck to his convictions on this and carried it through. The second thing that I think is history changing is that this is America standing up for deterrence again. And I got to tell you, our evacuation from Afghanistan, our poor support to Ukraine across two administrations, one that held things back and the other that's really held things back. You started to worry, are we going to stand up? Do the axis of aggressors actually think we're a credible military power? And President Trump just reintroduced the answer of yes. Now, we've got to continue with that, and we've got to continue to, carry forward that. But I think the restoration of U.S. credibility, that could be what this is. And then more.
So, Admiral,
more
what about the effect of the missile launch this afternoon? What does that tell you by Iran at Qatar and the fact that it was 14 missiles and none of them got close to anything? Are they done? Do you think they are now formally deterred, but they had to do a pop-off just to satisfy some elements in the regime?
And this is hard. You can go either way on you're reading into Khamenei's thinking is hard. But, I mean, they did try to attack probably the most heavily defended piece of airspace in the world, right? Al Udeid Airfield, Patriots, THAAD, Aegis ships, the F-16s, F-32s, F-35s, and F-15s themselves with counter drone and counter cruise missile capability. That was not the place you're going to get through with 10 to 14 weapons. You were going to need to launch 100 and get a little lucky. That's not what they tried to do. So it's hard to read into that, Hugh. That was a weird. I don't believe that they would do it just to do it, but maybe I'm wrong, and that's all that was. But it was never going to get through, and it didn't.
Now, last question, Admiral. We are not talking regime change, nor do we have the assets in the region to affect regime change. I don't think Israel's thinking about it either. Do you think there is a realistic chance that the Iranian people themselves can act against this regime, weakened as it is by the strikes of the last 8 days?
So in conditions where the regime wasn't nearly as badly impacted as it has been now, they have risen on their own, right? We can remember back 10 years ago when they put their back up. So there's a chance, and they have to be. The regime has failed. On the one thing they said was a must-do for them, work this nuclear program, they finally got the U.S. to knock it out. So I think that it's not a non-zero chance. I don't think we should be in the business of pushing it. I think Israel needs to be careful. Israel needs to be much more worried about striking missile launchers right now and knocking down the threat to Tel Aviv, because that's a closer run thing than attacking Al Udeid or a regime change right now. So in my mind, regime change, if it happens, it's got to happen because the Iranian people want it, not because Benjamin Netanyahu wants it or Donald Trump, who's made it pretty clear that's not his business.
His business is and has effectively been secured, stopping the nuclear program where it was on Friday. Next time, we'll talk about what we've learned about uranium isotopes. My friend Poneman tells me we can track these everywhere. So I'm hoping you'll know where it is next week when we come back. Admiral Mark Montgomery, follow him on Mark C. Montgomery on X and at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.